Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Series 11, Episode 4 of Doctor Who, Arachnids in the UK. And, well, this one was interesting. I kind of want to go back to my sort of go-to phrase with episodes like this. They can't all be winners, I guess. Especially coming off the coattails of Rosa last week. I was pretty much, thinking with the title Arachnids in the UK, this one was probably going to be a little bit goofier. Maybe not as good. Maybe not up to the same level of quality, of impact as Rosa turned out to be. And that kind of proved to be the case for me. Now, let me say, this almost felt like a complete and total Third Doctor era throwback, replete with evil corporations, or in this case, a corporate leader, an industrial setting sort of gone awry with of course, the putting the garbage underneath the big hotel, the landfill, building the hotel on top of this, and the resultant sort of mutations of the spiders and everything like that. I mean, it was calling back to me from the get-go things like Spearhead from Space, which was very much about an Auton invasion, but it was primarily set within an industrial setting. You had bad businessmen, characters. Inferno, which was sort of, looking at the negative impact of drilling, in sort of an alternate dimension Earth, granted, but the Doctor was able to witness the ramifications of that and essentially come back over to our dimension and halt such drilling before just havoc ensued. There were mutations, there was the potential destruction of the Earth and everything, and so the Third Doctor had to quell that, and he was able to do so from witnessing this all unfolding a little bit ahead of time in an alternate dimension. Of course, Planet of the Spiders, because spiders, which was the final Third Doctor serial. But the one that it really brought to mind was The Green Death. This is the final story of Jo Grant, one of my favorite companions in the history of Doctor Who, with the Third Doctor, as portrayed by Katie Manning, which largely dealt with these giant mutant maggots that were kind of the result of this chemical reaction that was due to mining a certain element or mineral or something like that. And the only difference with this story and that story is it wasn't giant maggots this time around, it was giant spiders, and rather than a big bad computer overseeing it all, mind controlling these businessmen, these suit and tie, circle jerks, it was, Donald Trump. Essentially in this episode. Chris Noth, there were moments in his performance where I could sort of separate the fact that they were essentially taking a jab at Donald Trump, and they do name drop Trump in this episode, but there were other moments through Noth's performance where it was very obvious, he had sort of the hand gestures down and the way he was delivering lines, especially when he was agitated and things like that, from the "you're fired" to "I didn't know," all these excuses and everything. It was a little too on the nose, it didn't quite work well for me. And I do tend to agree with a comment I got in recent history in my Doctor Who coverage on my channel. Somebody had said that Doctor Who is at its best when it's political. And to a point, I agree with that. Some of the more meaningful, impactful stories have been allegories and have sort of put that under the microscope, the political aspirations of our world and people in our world, sometimes through the guise of aliens who are coming to invade, or just really bad leaders, leaders and businessmen, politicians who are corrupt and things of that nature. And that was wholly, well and truly through the roof with the Noth character, with his character Robertson. But there were moments where it was just a little too over the top for me. And it got to the point where it was getting cringeworthy. I mean, I'm all for an eco-conscious sort of story. Very much akin to, like I say, The Green Death and Inferno and these kinds of things. And I'm all for looking at, how corrupt businessmen, sort of these self-important, very greedy types of people are, and everything like that. But this was just a little too close to the mark. I think they could have dialed it back. You know, they didn't have to be Spinal Tap, Nigel from Spinal Tap, and dial it to 11. A 9 would have sufficed. A 7 or 8 would have sufficed. You know, and really, it was there was somewhat of a conflict in watching the episode for me along those lines, because you had those moments that were just through the roof and over the top and almost nonsensical. And then you had these really genuinely creepy creature effects of these giant spiders, which thoroughly were giving me the willies. There's that one moment where Graham and Ryan are going to try to capture the one, and they like get it in a pot. And then Ryan's like, Graham, look behind you, and they take off running, and there's a whole crap ton of these spiders, you know, giving chase after them. And I properly felt a tingle up my spine. It properly got me uncomfortable. So there was that aesthetic, you know, alive and well throughout the course of this episode. Giant spiders. I don't like spiders. I'm going to like giant ones even less. And yet they still managed to make me feel sympathetic for the queen mother of them all, sort of dying, suffocating because of how overgrown she had gotten, you know, that kind of thing. I was very much feeling, as the doctor said, you know, don't come in here and shoot this creature, this poor creature. It can't help what's happening to it. None of these spiders can help what's happening to them. It's all sort of resultant in this landfill, this mutation, this chemicalization and all this kind of stuff, and these scientific studies a la Spider-Man gone awry. Forget the Venom symbiote. We just have giant spiders and a Donald Trump who's sitting on top of it all with his big grand hotel. And you have all of this stuff in contrast to what I consider the more meaty, you know, aspects of the episode, which were the familial aspects, you know, meeting Yaz's family, her sister, her father, her mother, most especially, Nadja, and how, you know, impactful. I was surprised when she gets fired from the get-go by, you know, the Robertson character, and then we find out, oh crap, that's Yaz's mom. That was actually a genuine surprise for me. But even more so was what Graham was going through. When they arrive home, they are there. It's only been a half an hour since they left. And he needs some time alone. He needs some time to acclimate and confront the loss of Grace, his wife, and how meaningful and impactful that was really the meat and potatoes of the episode for me. His going back home, his seeing visions of her, just tore my heart out. You know, the fact that she would be reminding him of, you know, you got to take the trash out, you got to do this on Sunday, you got to, all the things that she was communicating to him within his own imagination, for the loss of her, for the lack of her being there. And, you know, because of that sort of tumultuous tie between he and Ryan said, you want me to come along with you? But of course, Graham needed to confront this on his own, because as soon as this all happened, he never had a minute to let his hair down, to let it, you know, sort of permeate, to confront it. He tried, you know, in like episode 2, he tried to have a dialogue with Ryan and talk about, you know, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to confront it? We can be here for each other and that kind of thing. You know, he is sort of a grandfatherly, fatherly figure to Ryan. He has no one he can turn to in that sort of similar framework. He's going to have to deal with it on his own. And I really felt for that strenuous relationship, that adversarial relationship between them, that Ryan didn't go along, and that Graham did confront this on his own. And the follow through by the end of the episode to see that the three of them, they all, you know, I mean, each of them had something to confront. It was Yaz's being reunited with her family and just realizing, yeah, I'm not really happy at home right now. I want to go on the adventures with the doctor. For Graham, it was, I can't be alone. I can't go home and be alone with my thoughts and my wife, whom I was so madly in love with and is now gone, with her absence, you know, in so much of that space. I can't deal with that. I want to go on adventures with the doctor. For Ryan, you may stumble and question what was it for Ryan that led him to that, but there is some dialogue to the effect that he had got a letter from his father. His father sort of put forth this idea that, you know, I'm your proper family. In the absence of your gran and everything, my mother, your gran, And so maybe I ought to be there. Maybe you ought to come live with me. And this was enough to put Ryan off. And he's like, you know, I'd rather go off on these adventures with the Doctor. So they all confronted something in the midst of this strange and somewhat outlandish story of giant mutant spiders, and how it was this eco-conscious message of this pompous, just jerk face of a businessman who you know, because of his just signing the checks and balances and not paying attention to what is actually going on in the hopes of running for president in 2020, you know, it was all his fault. Basically. And the only sort of sad thing is the fact that this is another villain that gets away. I mean, in episode 1, you know, Tim Shaw or whatever it was, he gets away, the Stenza. In like episode 2 with the whole space race and everything, the bad guy who oversaw all of that gets away. Of course, in episode 3 with Rosa, we have our sort of, you know, racist greaser guy who's trying to manipulate history, time and space and everything, whose name escapes me off the top of my head right in this moment. But he gets, you know, sent back in time. He effectively gets away. And here's this guy. Here's this guy that really, he could have had some comeuppance served to him with the giant mother spider taking a bite out of his ass, you know, webbing him up. And that didn't happen. So I'm finding this interesting. I watched a video somewhere on YouTube. Somebody put forth the idea, is this going to be like a sort of Sinister Six kind of thing where all of these villains will come back to haunt the Doctor and her companions toward the end of the series in some way, shape, or form? They'll all band and unite and, you know, try to take down the Doctor and her companions for whatever reason, because they had been slighted or wronged, or whatever evils they were trying to concoct had the cap put on them by the Doctor. I don't know about that. I don't know if I subscribe to that idea, but it's an interesting idea. And I would be somewhat fascinated to see some of these characters recurring. But yeah, that's the thing I go back to, is that this was a little too on the nose. It was a little too over the top. And it wasn't unenjoyable. There were enjoyable, really meaty aspects to it. There were some humorous moments and everything like that. But especially in our current socio-political climate, it just felt a little too on the nose, a little too over the top. And for all of my appreciation for the performances and everything like that, I mean, it's a mild disservice. It's a mild gripe that this one was so in your face with so much of that stuff. I mean, you know, it was a point of contention for a lot of people, especially talking to me, who loved the previous episode, loved Rosa. A lot of people I saw were saying, well, man, this was too over the top. This was too in your face. You know, there was too much of an agenda behind it. I'd say, if anything, it was more so this episode that you could find, you know, credence for making that argument. Not so much Rosa. Rosa was beautiful. It was the best episode of Doctor Who, maybe ever, but at least in the modern series to date. This episode, not so much. You know, not so much for me. It was good. It was passable, but man, it just hit you over the head with it a little too much, a little too close to home, especially living stateside, you know, across the pond from where this originates and all of that. What I will say, the pluses were definitely the meaty aspects, meeting Yaz's greater family, and I hope we get more character development for her, because I feel like she herself, you know, I feel like they haven't put the spotlight as much on her as, say, Graham or Ryan with the loss of Grace and their relationship and things like that. I hope we get more development of Yaz as we go along. And I really appreciated, for the lack of that, getting to know her family and seeing that her mother was directly involved in some way, and that being sort of the through line through which we got to meet them and such like that. And we got to see the reasoning behind why Yaz didn't want to stick around in present day and wanted to go off on these adventures. And for all of those same reasons for Graham, the loss of Grace and the absence of her, for Ryan not wanting to confront his father because of that tumultuous relationship. And I hope that will put them all closer together, especially Graham and Ryan, you know, which has been my sort of thing I've been checking every episode that I mostly want, to see them getting along and finding each other and realizing how much they mean to each other. And then, of course, Jodie's performance was just pitch perfect, was fantastic. And that's been the same from the get-go. You know, it felt a little bit wonky in episode 2, as I talked about in my episode discussion video, but every other episode thus far, she has been a stellar Doctor. She is thoroughly the Doctor. She just happens to look like Jodie Whittaker, the actress. And that's pretty much where I leave it. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 4 of series 11 of Doctor Who, Arachnids in the UK. Love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. You know, I'd especially love to hear from you if you actually really loved this episode, just because it seemed a little too crazy to me, a little too over the top, as I say. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see further content like this in the future on my channel, please consider having a look at my PayPal contribution link posted both in the description and the comments below. Anything you saw fit to send my way to keep my longevity on YouTube going would be 2 thumbs up for me and very much appreciated. You have options you can explore, from sending a monthly contribution to a one-time only kind of thing, as well as sending me a personal message along with a contribution to request potential topics I may cover in the future or request shout-outs and things of that nature. And as I say, anything you sent my way would be very much appreciated along those lines. So yeah, otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well. I'll catch you all later. Peace.